Hi, Grace Chapel family. It's me, Cynthia Silva Parker again. I've been thinking a lot about where do we go from here. It's a question a lot of people are asking lately, and it's a question a lot of people have been answering for a very long time. So while we're in a moment of acute awareness about racism and its horrific impacts, the problems we're confronting are not new, and the solutions are not new either. There are four areas where we can confront racism in our everyday lives. We can confront and challenge racism in our own hearts and minds. We can challenge racism in our interpersonal relationships and interactions. We can challenge racism in our workplaces, schools, churches, and other institutions. And we can challenge racism in our very society and in the ideologies and false narratives that hold racist structures and systems in place. I'd like to share a few specific ways we can challenge racism at each of these levels. And none of what I'm about to say is original to me. I've learned this from activists, organizers, and teachers of many, many kinds. So first, how can we challenge racism in our own hearts and minds? Well, we start by doing our own homework. Take responsibility for learning both about history and about solutions. There are so many great books and videos to get you started. The Be the Bridge book that many of us are reading is a great place to start, and there are great companion resources on its website as well. We can heal from internalized racism. We all have internalized the racial hierarchy, and that causes deep wounds, both for people of color and for white people. We can uncover these wounds and set about the work of healing together in community. We can expose and reduce bias, both conscious and unconscious. The article, The Science of Equality, is one great place to begin. We can grieve and repent of racism, both personally and collectively. And finally, we can opt in, not out. There's work for all of us to do, no matter our racial background. So lean in and cultivate the humility and persistence it takes when work gets tough. Now, how can we challenge racism in our interpersonal relationships and interactions? Well, we can start by listening deeply and believing what people of color tell us about their experiences. And I'm not just talking to white folks here. There's lots of work to do within and between all of the different people of color groups as well. We can not tokenize people, build authentic relationships across difference. We can lean on affinity spaces, and this sounds like it contradicts the step before, but when you lean on people who share your racial background to support you in your learning journey and to support you in the emotional weight that you're working with, it can actually make it easier to be in cross-racial dialogue, not harder. And we can raise anti-racist kids. There is no such thing as a not racist. You're either confronting racism or you're supporting it. And confronting racism is learned behavior, just as racism is learned behavior. By the time we think our kids are old enough to talk about race and racism, they have already absorbed years of messages from the wider culture and even from our own families. Check out embracerace.org to join a multiracial community of parents who are raising a generation of children who are thoughtful, informed, and brave about race. And call in your family members, whether they are loud bigots, folks who quietly see racism as someone else's problem, or folks who don't acknowledge racism at all. Call them all in. Now, this probably all feels like pretty familiar advice. So how can we challenge racism in our workplaces, schools, churches, and other institutions? Well, in our workplaces and businesses, we can work for equity, not just diversity and inclusion. Among other things, that means making sure people of color are fully part of the decision-making process and that resources are allocated towards those who need them the most. In our churches, we have to challenge our very concept of God and what God expects from us. How much of it is actually based on the Bible? How much of it is based on white Western church traditions? It's tough stuff, and we have got to dig in. In our schools, we can demand conditions and resources that allow all students to thrive and flourish. And we can demand curriculum that reflects the truth about racism and also about the resistance and resilience of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in the face of racism. And in our other private and public institutions, we must demand full access, fair treatment, and attention to equitable outcomes. Truthfully, the fact that there's so much we can do at this within our institutions gives me great hope. None of us has to do everything, and all of us can do something. And finally, how can we challenge racism in our society and challenge the ideologies and false narratives that hold racist systems and structures together? Well, in our neighborhoods, we can create welcoming spaces. That includes challenging our neighbors and public officials to welcome efforts to integrate our neighborhoods and create affordable housing options. We can stop consuming racist images and stereotypes in entertainment and cultural activities. Instead, we can seek out films, music, books, and art that tell stories of and by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. We can use our wallets to support businesses that are owned by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and we can avoid businesses that harm communities of color. If we have funds to invest, we can insist on social and environmental responsibility screens. If we own stock, we can engage in shareholder activism to influence company behavior. And finally, we can use our voices and our vote. We can register people to vote and support efforts to get out the vote. We can work for, vote for, and perhaps even become politicians who advance racially just policies and practices. To find out what some of these policies and practices might be, we can study the platforms of movements and organizations led by Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, as well as white allies. We can organize around their recommendations for transforming healthcare, education, the economy, public safety, and so much more. So as I close, I want to share with you just a few of my go-to resources. And they are the Movement for Black Lives, the Poor People's Campaign, PolicyLink, and the Color of Change. These are but a few of the folks who are guiding us toward a more racially just society where everyone can thrive. And Oprah Winfrey's recent town halls are full of wisdom about where we are and what we need to do next. So I recommend listening to them in full. So while challenging racism sounds huge, and it does take serious and sustained effort and will, there are so many things we can and must do. As God's people, we cannot sit idly by while any of our brothers and sisters suffer. Let us all do our part to challenge racism every day. I leave you with the words of the prophet Micah. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. May God bless you as you live out these words. Peace.